For this first build, all we're gonna need is a piece of 3-foot 4x4 material, a scrap piece of 1x6 or some type of 3/4 inch or even 1/2 inch piece of plywood, and finally a scrap piece of 1/4 inch plywood. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we need to do is measure 16 inches, and that's gonna be our first cut on the 4x4. And now with what is left over of the 4x4, you want 2 8-inch sections. So now that gives us 2 8-inch boards and 1 16-inch board. This next step is optional. You can leave these rounded edges on here, make it more like a rusted look. That's the way that I built the first one. I left the rounded edges on there. But on this one, I'm gonna take the rounded edges off and make it a clean, more sleek look. So now that I have 2 faces flat, I'm gonna put this on the table saw, and that way I can make this to a perfect, maybe 3 inches or so is probably what we'll end up going with. Let's see what we got. So we're about 3 5/16 and about 3 5/16. 3 5/16, 3 5/16, 3 3/8, 3 3/8. So I'm going to just rip these down and probably try to end up with hopefully 3 1/8 after it's all said and done. Okay, so on my 16-inch board, I found the dead center of the board. So now we're gonna cut and make probably about a 60-degree angle to make a roof. So a lot of miter saws don't really have that 60-degree angle or something really sharp angle like that. So to make this cut easier, I put this jig together. All it is some scrap 3/4 inch plywood up here, and then scrap 1/2 inch plywood down here. I'm gonna put it down here. I'm gonna take my piece, and I've got my center marked here. So I will take my miter saw, and let's see, just kind of go with what kind of looks good. Let's see, that just hit 15 degrees. Yeah, let's go a little more. We'll go 20 degrees. Yeah, 20 degrees looks pretty good. All right, we'll make our cuts. So this is what you should have. This is your little roof. Now with these 2 smaller pieces, we're just gonna cut a 45 at the very top, 45 at the very top. Just gonna knock off those burrs that it creates whenever you cut it. All right, so now we have something that looks kind of like this. All right, so it's coming together. All right, so now we need to get our scrap piece of either 1x6, it's gonna be for the bottom for this to sit on, either a scrap piece of 1x6 or maybe scrap piece of 3/4 inch plywood. In my case, I'm gonna use a scrap piece of 1/2 inch plywood. Any of that'll work. You just wanna make sure you have a sturdy bottom. So the width of the bottom doesn't really matter. It's kind of really up to you how much overhang you want on either side. it really doesn't matter. So just kind of go with what looks best to you. I'm gonna add an extra, I think I'll put an inch on either side. In this case, we're gonna go 11 3/4. So it really depends on how you wanna do this. I'm gonna set everything up to where you can see it the way you would see it from the very front. So if you leave everything level at the front, this is kind of how it'll look. It really doesn't look that bad at all, but I prefer to have it offset about a 1/2 inch or so, meaning stick this middle piece out and put the other two flush with the back side. So I'm gonna show you, that's flush with the back side over here. And then that way it gives it some depth. Now, you know, like a more three-dimensional look. If you don't like this gap right here, that's perfectly fine. Just cut these down, you know, just trim them on your table saw. But I'm not worried about that gap at the back, because if this is sitting like against the wall or on a table that's more towards the wall, you won't never really be able to see the back. But I do like that 1/2 inch, you know, call it a reveal or whatever you want to call it, but I like that 1/2 inch little sticking out there or offset, so that way it gives it a little bit more character. But at this point, you can go ahead and glue these to these side pieces to the middle piece, and then of course as an assembly we'll glue this whole thing to the very bottom. So to make life a lot easier, I've got this thing set up exactly where it's going to be once it's a finished product. And I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw a line right where this thing is going to end up being on both sides. And the reason why I'm doing that is that way I can remove this, put my glue on, and know exactly where it lines back up without having to try to line everything up again. Double check, make sure nothing's moved, make sure it's completely down. Okay. All right, now this will pretty much hold together with this clamp. So now I'm gonna get some glue along the bottom. All right, so we're gonna give that a little time to dry. So while that's drying, we now need to make our little windows. And I've actually created the shape that I like for the windows, and I've created a template for it. So how I did that was just drew it out on paper, cut the paper out, and then traced that onto the wood, and then cut this piece of wood out. So that way this is my template. And we're gonna need a total of 4 of these windows, because one of them is gonna act as a door. You know, we'll just you know, paint it to look like it's a door. And I'm gonna go cut all these out, and I'm gonna have to end up using the bandsaw to make the curves. I got my little windows cut out, and as you can see, they're not completely perfect, which is not a big deal. I mean, you know, this is supposed to be a rustic project anyway, but what you can do, even if you don't have like a belt sander or anything like that, just use your palm sander and stand it up and just kind of work it around. So now we're going to take the last little piece of this 1/4 inch plywood scrap, and we're going to make us some little roofs. We want a little bit of an overhang, so we're at 3 1/4. So we're going to make 3 1/2 by 5 inches, 3 1/2 by 5 inches, and the top section we're going to have to cut that 45-degree angle. Let's make sure that this is the same. All right, 3.5 by 5 inches. And there goes the finished product. So you can see there's not much difference between leaving the rounded edges versus squaring off the edges. It just gives it a little bit cleaner look. So from here, you just go ahead and just paint it however you want to. On this more rustic one, I put like this little border up here, but it's not necessary unless you really want to. I did not paint anything on the windows or the doors, but you could detail those. You know, you can make this green or you make this gray like it's grass or like it's concrete. You could paint these roofs however color you want to, or you can just leave it the natural look. Now this last church build is probably about as easy as it gets. You'll need a 1x8 and a 1x4. And that's all you're gonna need. Starting with the 1x4, we're gonna cut one piece at 15 inches. We're gonna cut another one at 10 inches. And our 8-inch board, we're gonna cut at 12 inches. So we got our 10-inch board, we got our 15-inch board, and we got our 12-inch board. Our 10-inch board is going to be our base, so we're just going to sit this aside. We're not going to try to put any angles or anything on this, sit this aside. But we want to find the center of our 15-inch board and the center of our 12-inch board, and we're just going to cut 45s on both of those. All right, so now we should have something that looks like this right here. And there's our bottom piece. So literally all we do now is we center these together and glue and staple or brad nail or however you want to do to this bottom piece. Okay, so I've glued and I've brad nailed on the back side of these boards, so that way, you know, once it's in place, you won't see them. So now what I'm going to do is this little ledge on my table saw is exactly 3/4 of an inch from the deck or the tabletop of the saw to this little ledge, and that is the perfect reveal that I want. So I'm just going to drop this down here. That way it has something really good to kind of press up against, and it's going to be 3/4 of an inch down, so I can set this completely flat. Find my center mark, which I've already got my center mark marked right here, and I'm going to use this indention in the table saw to line that up, so it's going to be right on that. I've got my mark on the bottom of these where center is at. Line that up. Let me get me a little mark here. And then now I'm going to put me a little bit of glue. Going across here. Just like that. Put this all back up. And brad nail it. It's literally that easy to batch these out. You could probably batch one of these out every 5 or 6 minutes or so. So I ended up making about 40 of these things for VBS for our church. And I brought in a couple of them that my kids did. And so that way you can see how they decorated them. They just used a little cross right here and glued that to it. They used popsicle sticks and put them on as for the roof, and also popsicle sticks for the doors if you wanted to. You could do this, or you could just leave it plain. I think it looks perfectly fine either which way you choose to do it. I believe these things are a really cool project. So there you have it, 2 extremely easy church projects that you can build, both of them with probably a couple of hours and not very much material, probably just some scraps you've already got lying around the shop. This one is a little bit more on the difficult side to build, as you see. It has some sharper angles and different components that have to be cut and then glued on, but still a fairly easy project to make. This one, extremely easy. We're talking about 3 boards just glued and brad nailed together. Very, very easy to make. You could probably literally batch these out in about 10 minutes or less, probably less once you start batching out more of them at once. You can either leave them more modern, more sleek look, or you can distress them, make them look a little bit older, however you prefer to do that. But I hope you enjoy these projects, and YouTube thinks that you'll enjoy this video also, so if you'll just click right here and I'll see you in that video.